R. Kelly has been accused of having inappropriate physical and sexual relations with at least 6 women. According to a report issued by BuzzFeed earlier this week, R. Kelly is really portrayed as a monster who allegedly housed 3 women in Chicago and 3 women in Atlanta and controls their everyday lives, from where they can shower and eat and use the restroom, and how they can dress, and most significantly, how they engage in sexual encounters, both with R. Kelly and presumably with others as well. The father of at least one woman has asserted that his daughter has been brainwashed, that she is effectively a prisoner in R. Kelly's house. R. Kelly, for his part, has come lashed back, insisting that the women live with him by their own free will. And in fact, at least one of the women has spoken publicly about her desire to stay with R. Kelly and to be with the superstar. This week, we're going to explore really the legal lines between coercion and free will, and what role society can and should play in protecting young women from a superstar who promises to promote their careers. I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
And this is Behind the Bar. Derek, any story about R. Kelly, especially when it involves interactions with young women, and in this case the women are of age, really does necessitate a retelling of the history of his involvement with women who were not of age.
Yeah, I mean, look, R. Kelly's been in the business for a very long time, and dating back to 1994, he married Aaliyah. Remember, Aaliyah was the up-and-coming, bright superstar. She was in a couple movies, Romeo Must Die. She tragically passed away.
She was a protege of R. Kelly's.
A protege of R. Kelly.
That
actually sets up R. Kelly's bona fides as a star maker. So R. Kelly's already a star in the early 90s with several hits, and Aaliyah, he turns into a star. He actually marries her. She was a 15-year-old in 1994, so that's where the underage allegations come into play. But R. Kelly is sort of minted as someone who can turn someone into a celebrity, and I think that's important for the current story as well. More trouble comes from this because the Aaliyah allegations come to light in the context of a 1997 allegation that he seduced another 15-year-old girl.
Right, a woman by the name of Tiffany Hawkins, who I guess by the time that she sued was of age, but she sued him saying that he had been having sex with her from the time that she was 15. She seeks documentation, knowing sort of about the underage marriage of Aaliyah. Mm-hmm. She seeks documentation to support that and say, look, he's got this pattern of doing this. But nevertheless, the story about his marriage to Aaliyah comes out based on this lawsuit. And I guess he and Aaliyah, or maybe just him, had doctored the marriage certificate, had lied on it to say that Aaliyah was of age, therefore justifying the marriage.
Right.
It was eventually set aside because they were not legal. She was not legally of age to consent to the marriage. So there we are through 97.
That's right. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, this trouble's sort of brewing where people are blowing smoke about his predilections towards younger women and seducing them and so forth. And there's an enterprising reporter, this guy Jim DeVergatis, who's actually the author of the BuzzFeed article, used to work for the Chicago Sun-Times, and he writes a series of articles about R. Kelly and his using his fame and influence, or allegedly using his fame and influence to meet girls as young as 15, seduce them with promises of fame and fortune in the future, using sort of his Aaliyah handbook to lure in new people into this. So in 2002, this actually comes to sort of culminates in 2002 when a reporter gets a tape of Kelly.
I love that you are afraid to say comes to a head right there. Go on.
I know.
Go on.
So in 2002, a reporter gets a tape of Kelly urinating on what is alleged to be an underage girl. So this is part of a sex act. There is a tape. It does exist. It becomes part of a criminal case against R. Kelly for child pornography, because if this is an underage girl being peed on in a sexual act, you've got child pornography.
And also the police, in doing their investigation, searched R. Kelly's house and allegedly found a dozen photos of him having sex with this girl, young girl. Those photos were suppressed because the police did not have the proper warrants in order to seize the information. So those photos never really came to light in terms of a court case, but nevertheless, they exist.
Right.
And sure, you should not be convicted in a court for things that are found by a legal search, but you can still be convicted in the court of public opinion, and he really was. His career has nevertheless thrived. That's a different discussion.
That's right. Look, he was acquitted of these charges, but in the court of public opinion, and this is true of guys like Woody Allen as well and Roman Polanski, you are a criminal in people's minds. Whether or not the case carries itself out and you get a guilty verdict, that's what the public perceives you as. So now we have this journalist, DeRogatis, then publishes this new BuzzFeed article that you alluded to with more allegations that he's holding these women captive. You mentioned some of the details. There's allegations that he controlled what they ate, how they dressed, when they bathed, when they slept, how they engaged in sexual encounters. And the big allegation here, Jason, is that he records these sexual encounters, apparently.
He records the sexual encounters. He also exercises some sort of physical and emotional control control over the girls and sort of, coerces them through this control into having sexual encounters that they may not otherwise be fully consenting to. And then I think significantly for our purposes, Derek, there are 3 former employees who allegedly talked to the BuzzFeed reporter, and they claim that in addition to sort of the mental control that he's asserting over these women, there's also a certain physical abuse that happens as well. And again, I think it's really important to say that R. Kelly and the women involved, the alleged victims, to the extent that they've spoken, have all vehemently denied these allegations, and we don't know anything except what we've read. So I want to be very clear about that point. But nevertheless, for the discussion, I think there is something, obviously there's something untoward, especially given R. Kelly's background. He's got these girls, they're very young, they're of age, but they're very young. They are clearly seeking to become famous, and that's why they go with him in the first place, including the one woman who has spoken out.
Yep.
That's why they go with him in the first place. And really, what is the line, not just of morality, but what is the legal line? Has R. Kelly done anything illegal?
Yeah, look, this is the million-dollar question here. So, to the extent the allegations from the former employees involve acts of physical abuse,
clearly
you've got a
illegal.
crime there.
Right.
That's clearly illegal. Where we get into the gray area are these allegations that they are, quote, sex slaves. Now, that's a loaded term. Slavery, obviously, is a bad thing.
Right.
But sex slaves, what they're alleging is that he's running a sort of, he's coercing the women into having sex with him with promises of fame and brainwashing them into believing that he's their only savior to get there.
So I think it's really important. Let's break this down, what coercion is. Obviously, if you're coercing somebody with fears, physical threats, with fear of exposing them, these
hurting their family, these are criminal threats.
Those are criminal threats. Those aren't supported by anything. What seems to be happening here is, again, as you said, he's promising them potential stardom. And is that good? Is that a crime? If you promise somebody, hey, listen, you could be a star. Come live with me. Come, be part of this house of ill repute, or maybe you're filmed having sex or whatever it is, and I will help make you a star. Is there a crime there?
It doesn't seem. Look, there's no brainwashing crime. There's no emotional abuse crime. And what's important here is we learned this in law school. There's these gray areas of seduction. Now, when you're trying to seduce someone, you're puffing yourself up. I can give you a good life. I'll take you out to nice fancy dinners. This is all a civil matter that there's no crime being committed when you're trying to have sex with someone. And you can really push the boundaries here.
Well, let me pose a hypothetical
Sure.
to you. And we don't know this is true, but I think there might be, maybe this is on the fringes of the allegations that are being made. If he were to say to them, I can get you a meeting with a top record producer, but in order for me to get you that meeting, you're going to have sex with me.
Now you've got a problem. Now you've got someone
solicitation of prostitution.
You got prostitution at that point because you're giving them something of value. A meeting with a producer is a valuable thing, even though it's not actual cash. It's an in-kind benefit that this person is saying, you promised me this. You didn't deliver on that. You did it to have sex with me. That could be fraud and that could be prostitution.
Right. But instead, what seems to be happening here, at least from R. Kelly's perspective, is he owns these homes and he really does want to be a hit maker and a star maker. And so he invites these young, talented women to come and live with him. And as part of the bargain, they are to do what he says in terms of how to dress, how to look, when and how to bathe, and all these other things, not because he is trying to necessarily control them for control's sake, but he's trying to control them because he is selling that this is how he can make them into a star. Obviously, if he's insisting on sex in exchange for something of value, you have prostitution. But if as part of that deal, he tries to seduce these women, and women and young men have slept with people in Hollywood, and this is not technically Hollywood, but figuratively Hollywood, have slept with people in Hollywood forever in order to get ahead. And if those kinds of sexual relationships are not unlawful.
That's right. That's right. I mean, look, if R. Kelly is a very rich and successful person, he says, these are the house rules. You want to come in, the door's there, it's not locked. But if you come into my house, this is how I lead my life. I want you to dress and act a certain way. I want you to bathe at this time. I want us to have sex frequently, and I can help your career. It's really just house rules. It's not a crime that's being committed. Is it unseemly?
Absolutely.
Does the public have a right to judge him very, very harshly? Absolutely. And he's got a checkered past already, but I don't think we're in a criminal area.
So assuming that there wasn't a zealous prosecutor who wanted to bring him up on charges, and again, putting aside the physical potential for physical abuse here, which we have to put that aside because if there's physical abuse, then we have an absolute crime and he'll be prosecuted for that. But putting that aside for a second, are there specific crimes that he might, if a zealous prosecutor was there, be charged with some sort of kidnapping charges, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I was thinking of kidnapping could be a potential offense. That
false imprisonment, I guess.
False imprisonment is the big one, right?
Yeah.
So false imprisonment, if you hold someone against their will through force, and even if there's no force, through the threat of force, that could constitute the crime of false imprisonment. That's a felony. That's a big crime. There are misdemeanor versions of it, but if he's holding them against their will for years on end, and that's what the parents are saying, that the women are not acting of their own free will because of some sort of amorphous threat, that could be a crime. And I think a zealous prosecutor who really wants to stick it to R. Kelly, you could bring that. You're going to face an army of lawyers, though, and I don't think it's necessarily the strongest case you can bring.
And the real difficulty that you have here is that the alleged victims are not claiming victimization at all. Now, that said, that does not necessarily win the day, right? We have seen, you hear about it all the time in battered wife situations where the victim of abuse from a controlling and domineering man can in fact be unwilling to come forward with those allegations, and prosecutors will look past the unwillingness of the victim and go after the individual anyways. But again, in those cases, you have specific incidences of physical abuse, which we don't, for our purposes, we don't have.
That's right. And Joycelyn Savage is the woman you're referring to, who's come out very vocally. She's been in 2 videos that we've had up on TMZ's site where she is adamantly saying, I am not being held against my will. I'm here of my own volition. I enjoy my circumstances. My family is embarrassing me and themselves. She shows no physical injury. It does seem that someone is recording her, and there's maybe some suspicious shadows in one of the pictures of her maybe not being at liberty to say anything she wants. But really, you're going to have a complicated situation as a prosecutor if you don't have any cooperative witnesses.
So, Derek, the thing that people have brought up, and I think it's a really good question, is how is this any different than sort of the Manson-style cults or the David Koresh-style cults? Now, obviously, those ended in horrific acts of violence, but that hasn't happened here, and there's no sign that it will happen. Had Charles Manson committed a crime before the actual murders were committed? I mean, just by having these women around this house, they were all traded for sex, and, everybody was sleeping with everybody else, but they were there by their own volition. They might claim brainwashing, but your point, there is no crime of brainwashing.
Yeah, I mean, Charles Manson's an interesting situation. Before the murders, there may have been some other crimes that you could pin on Charles Manson. Was he pimping them out? He was the way the community made money was he would send the women out to have sex for money and steal cars, and then they would come back and bring the funds and buy drugs and so forth. That could be some sort of...
But that doesn't appear to be happening
here. That doesn't appear to be happening here. R. Kelly has his own money from his music career, so I don't think we have quite a Charles Manson situation. Jim Jones, though, moved 900 people or 1,000 people to Guyana. No crime had been committed, and I think we know that because a congressman went there, and he checked out the situation. The crime was committed when Leo Ryan tried to leave, and he shot some of the people who were leaving. That's where the crime of Jonestown.
That's a crime?
That's a crime. I think we're good once you have people murdered on the airstrip.
Yeah.
But before then, he was just a charismatic leader who invited some people to Guyana.
This really does sort of beget a larger question about what is a cult and what does it mean to be a part of a cult where you claim you can't leave. I've been reading the Jeffrey Toobin book on Patty Hearst, and she came out of this situation claiming brainwashing. And I heard an interview with Jeffrey Toobin where he said, things like Stockholm syndrome are terms used by journalists, not by medical doctors, because people are able to act by their own free will. And what does it really mean to be brainwashed? We are all taught things and learned things and regurgitate things that we've heard from other people. At what point are we brainwashed? There are people on the left who would say that anybody who believes that Donald Trump is a good president has been brainwashed by the right. There are people on the right who would say the inverse about Democrats. So, brainwashing is a hard thing. And to your point, I've said it twice now, it is not a crime to brainwash someone.
It just
isn't. As long as there's no concomitant illegal act that you can assign to it.
Yeah, so while untoward, and while I wouldn't want to visit R. Kelly for the holidays, I don't think it's a place I'd like to
I'm not going to send my daughter down for a meet and greet.
Exactly. I don't think I'm sending her backstage to any concerts. I don't think we have a crime here. And I think what's very telling is I don't think the cops are even investigating this. Now, what we can have is a welfare check, right?
Sure.
The parents have raised a bunch of problems. They could send out cops to just go look in on things, even without sort of a search warrant, because they're worried about their children being sick. I think they've done that, and the women don't seem to be upset about it.
They did in Georgia. Police went and visited the house, and they didn't see anything. Now, again, that doesn't really mean that much.
No.
If the women claim to be there by their own free will, but they've somehow been brainwashed, somehow subservient to him based on some sort of coercion or threat, they're going to put together a good appearance, notwithstanding an underlying crime. But we don't have anything to back that up. And even the BuzzFeed reporter, except for the there are the allegations of physical abuse that came from the other employees that were there, and that's really something that I think you got to hang your hat on if you really want to see this come to an end. But for now, I don't think we have nearly enough for anybody to intervene.
I agree. So what's that sound?
That is mail time, but quick question before we get there. How far does a welfare check get an officer inside of a building?
It's interesting because you don't have the right to go in and search somebody's house without a search warrant. Typically, they will go. I mean, you can get a search warrant if you have, specific instances of abuse that you can show, and you can go to a search warrant. But typically what it is, they go and knock on the front door and say, do you mind if we come in and talk to your family and see how things are here? And
they could say, we have a report that this individual is in distress. They can say, is that individual here? And you have to answer that honestly.
Yeah, you have to answer that on. Well, although you could tell the cops to get away, but that's going to raise suspicions, and I don't think that's what happened in this case. I think there was some cooperation here, and there were no findings of anything untoward. You only take that so far; it only gets you so far. But nevertheless, you don't have to open up absent a search warrant. You do not have to open up the door and let cops come in.
All right, so remember to write in your questions and comments to behindthebar@tmz.com. First up is from Carla. Seeing as you guys live in LA, I'm sure you've heard about the Jake Paul situation regarding his West Hollywood neighbors. The neighbors are meeting with city officials to review code requirements and may file a class action lawsuit against him to declare Paul a public nuisance. I was wondering what that would mean for him. Would he have to move, and would he have trouble finding a new place because of this?
For those of you who don't know, Jake Paul is one of the very biggest stars in the entire digital universe.
He's a YouTube star, right?
His YouTube page. Parker, how many subscribers does he have?
Subscribers right now, 8.5 million, but the bigger thing is over the past 30 days, he's gotten 500 million views.
That's
wow.
Is that more than Behind the Bar?
I don't know. It's like right up there. It's like 1 and 2. A public nuisance is a big, complicated term. All it really means is the use of your property can't be used in a way that substantially interferes with someone else's enjoyment of their property. So it's a neighbor issue, right? If you got a lot of smells or a lot of loud noises, you could hurt the ability of other people to enjoy their property even just by using your own.
So Jake Paul, who is arguably the biggest thing in the YouTube universe, is publishing these videos, and I guess in those videos you can really find out where his house is, because some of the videos show like
very conspicuous landmarks
and other things. So he's had thousands of people show up. Some have invited into the house itself. Others just congregating outside, and they are leaving what people leave when they come in droves. Number one, a ton of noise. It's upsetting the neighbors, and number two, just an overall sense of kind of anarchy that's happening both within and outside this house. Although I have to tell you, based on the definition of public nuisance, I don't know that he's necessarily inviting them. He's just sort of not dissuading them from coming, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I don't think you get to public nuisance on these facts because he's not inviting them, and he's really just living his life. Jake Paul doesn't owe a duty to the world not to publish his address. If he wants to take videos and people can figure out where he lives and they have their own volition come over and storm his property, that's really not on Jake Paul as a public nuisance. So I think that's on those people if they commit crimes once they get there.
If that was the end of it, he was publishing these videos and lots of people were coming over and creating sort of a lot of noise. I think he'd probably be okay, but there are some complicating factors as we understand it.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I followed this a little bit. He's constantly parking this, big van on the street illegally and leaving it there for days on end. There's a ton of trash on the street. There's fires.
There's a dumpster, an actual dumpster.
An actual dumpster.
To take care of trash because so many people are bringing trash. There's an actual dumpster there.
Yeah, he's not the guy who just rolls out his blue cans every Friday. He's got a gigantic commercial dumpster. Apparently, there's also visible graffiti, which reminded me of the Chris Brown days.
That's
Remember when he graffitied his whole house? I actually don't think there's a public nuisance in putting certain images on your house. You could offend an HOA if he lives in a neighborhood where you're not allowed to have certain things on your lawn, but I think you're allowed to paint your house.
Yeah,
maybe not with obscene images, but graffiti I think could be okay.
So apparently his neighbors are seeking a class action or whatever it is. There's no real class action here, but they could potentially get certain types of court orders to require him to do certain things. Maybe get the dumpster off of the sort of the land where other people, outsiders, can use it, so that there's no trash kind of developing there. Maybe not be so conspicuous where he lives, maybe even dissuade people from coming over just to placate the neighbors. But at the end of the day, it's not like they're going to force him to sell his house or anything like that. It's just a matter of, what steps does he need to take to kind of mitigate these factors that are pissing the neighbors off.
Yep.
All right, next up is from Luke. Hey guys, I was wondering what your thoughts on the OJ parole hearing would be coming up. Will he be released? If so, why?
Yeah, it's OJ Day tomorrow. We got a big parole hearing.
So I think OJ's honestly going to go free. He, by all accounts, he's been a model prisoner. He was sentenced to a 33-year prison term, up for parole in 9. By all of the objective measures by which parole boards look at whether or not somebody should be let go early, he's met all of those. Been a model prisoner, never gotten in trouble. As a matter of fact, has assisted other prisoners. I know he's got this history where he definitely killed his wife and her boyfriend, but he hasn't been convicted of those charges, and so he can't be punished for them.
I agree, and I would only quibble with by all accounts, because by most accounts, there was a report today that he was caught in his cell masturbating. We did some digging, and apparently he wasn't masturbating in his cell. But I learned a little
You're
bit,
saying that OJ did not masturbate in his cell today?
I'm not saying he didn't. He wasn't busted by the penal authorities for masturbating in his cell. And I learned something which I think is very interesting. You're allowed to masturbate. You're just not allowed to call attention to it. You can't wave your arms around and stare at the guard or anything like that. But if you have a nice little private session, no harm, no foul.
Can you imagine if there was a rule that prohibited people from masturbating in their cell and it was enforced?
Yeah, you can't have a hard and fast rule on that.
No, it'd be like the priesthood all of a sudden.
All right, and the last one up is from David. Dear Jason, Next to every episode is a number, and every year has the same number of weeks in it. It isn't that hard to plan your vacation around your 1-year anniversary of your podcast. Shame on you.
For shame.
Okay. Happy anniversary, Derek. I'm very happy that we got through 1 year doing this together. It's a slog. We don't particularly care for each other, and the fact that we have to sit across the table once a week for a year has been trouble.
And thank you, Jason, for getting to the 5-yard line of that year mark. I mean, we had to bring in Parker in the red zone to really punch it over the goal line, but it's been a blast.
Secondly, I had a lovely family vacation in Italy. It was fantastic. I had a lot of gelato, and I would not give that up for this stupid podcast, for all
For all the tea in China?
For all the tea in China.
All right. See you guys next week.
Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episode over here.